Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week, we kick off a series of 1930s horror films with the 1932 film Dr. X. For those counting at home, this is mainline episode 314. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, publisher at Castlebridge Media. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. Also in Austin, Mr. Drew Edwards is the writer-creator of the long-running underground comic Halloween Man, currently published by Comixology. He is a Ringo nominee, Austin Chronicle Best of Austin Award winner, and a member of the Pan American Fellowship. Say hello, Drew.
Flesh. Synthetic flesh.
Synthetic flesh. I love that. And finally, in Denver, color commentary from Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello.
Hello.
I think that I invented an all-new pronunciation of your name. That's...
As long as you don't call me Guzman, they'll be okay. Just no Guzman.
Right. Dr. X. Dr. X is a 1932 American pre-code two-color Technicolor horror mystery film produced by First National and Warner Brothers. It's based on a play that was originally called The Terror by Howard Comstock and Alan C. Miller. It was directed by Michael Curtiz, and it stars the amazing Lionel Atwill and the amazing Fay Wray and Lee Tracy. The film was produced before the motion picture production code was enforced, so it's got lots of themes: murder, rape, cannibalism, prostitution. It is one of the last such films made, along with Warner Brothers, in the two-color Technicolor process, and that is why this movie appears to be essentially like green and red, basically. And so I can't wait to. And a lot of people, if you grew up watching this on TV, you would not have seen the color version, but we saw it on Prime. Prime has the color. We're kicking off the 1930s with this. It's really cool to go all the way back to the 1930s for a series, and I'm excited. Drew, you've chosen our entire 1930s set. So why don't we start with Drew for opening thoughts? We'll go Drew, Julia, Tony, and then I'll go. Drew, opening thoughts, Dr. X.
I'm really glad that we are kicking this one off, and the Halloween season in particular, with some really old school horror, because I think there's something about the Halloween season that just goes really well with the classics. This is an important film. It is not only considered to be, by many, the first color horror film, but it is also one of the first mainstream films to deal with the subject of cannibalism. It's an interesting topic in that the 30s, there was a boom of horror films, particularly, as everybody knows, the classic horror films of Universal. And this is one of the movies that was kind of made to compete with Universal. And indeed, Warner Brothers was actually trying to out Frankenstein with this. And the interesting thing is about that is when they saw the finished film all cut together, they thought for the time, at least for the time period, it was incredibly strong stuff, especially with all the talk of cannibalism. So they actually, if you see any of the trailers for this movie, they actually tried to push it more as a comedy, which it does have a lot of laughs in it, to be fair. I really like this movie. I think the two-color gives it an interesting sort of dreamy look. It doesn't have the same Technicolor vibe as later Technicolor films have, because this is such a primitive version of the process, but it's very pretty to look at. This has got an amazing cast, and gotta love those mad scientist sets, and the monster at the end with its Max Factor mask is really cool to look at. There's just a lot of really awesome stuff in this movie, and I am glad that I was able to share it with y'all.
That is really cool. Julia, what are your opening thoughts here?
Gosh, I thought it was a really beautiful film. I was amazed. I don't know how much more money they have than Ed Wood had, but I kept thinking, not necessarily for the super opulent sets, but for the more basic sets. I was like, why couldn't Ed Wood have done something like this? Like, this wouldn't have been that difficult. But anyway, it's really beautiful to look at. Really neat performances, interesting. The only thing was I didn't like I always knew it was going to be who the killer was. Like that was not a surprise for me. I was always sure that was who the killer was. But I didn't like how the reveal happens and how it actually works. That whole thing didn't work for me. But everything else I thought was brilliant. I love the journalist character. I think he's hilarious. Yeah, I thought it was a really neat picture. I'm glad that we're doing it. Thanks, Drew.
Oh, you're
Wonderful.
welcome.
Tony, what are your thoughts?
I really like this movie. It was really cool to see it. It has just so much. I mean, it's packed. It's got comedic bits, the kind of standard comedic bits from the time, as well as a locked room mystery and body horror and mad scientists. And I mean, they really threw cannibalism. They threw a lot at the audience. It's pretty cool that it's from the 30s, that all of this was going on in one movie. I really impressive. There's detective work stuff going on. I mean, you could even say that the interview part or the plan, I kind of wonder if Carpenter saw it before he made the thing, in the way that kind of works out. But yeah, it's really like there's a lot going on, and it's pretty cool. I dug it.
Really, it's so funny to think of this. That we revere the universal horrors, and clearly, horror's landscape is sculpted heavily by what happens from Universal. In 1931 with Frankenstein and so on. And that, as we've talked about, has a very distinct look, which has a very sort of fairy tale kind of look about it. This is a whole other branch of evolution. It is a different world completely. It's much more earthy, much more modern, of course, but it's still not our world specifically. There's crazy sets, these Art Deco designs. There are tables there's at least one table in here that's made up of multiple suspended metal slabs that is just the most gorgeous, ridiculous piece of furniture ever. And there's lots and lots of it. I agree with you, Tony, that one scene towards the end really does feel like a moment in the thing, especially because they're all trapped. So I really enjoyed this. I wanted to read like sequels. Apparently the one thing that has a name like a sequel is not really a sequel. I wanted to read sequels. I wanted to read fanfic. I'm ready for lots more Dr. X adventures. I'm shocked it didn't happen. So anyway, let's get started. Just making our way through. There are murders happening because basically this movie is set up into two areas. For a while they're in the city, and then they go to Agatha Christie land on a cliff in Long Island. But before then, they're in New York City, and somebody has been murdering people, so-called under the light of the full moon. And the police have turned to the very famous and extraordinarily wealthy Dr. X, played by Lionel Atwill. Drew, would you like to explain Dr. X and his milieu?
So Dr. X is introduced to us as a scientific consultant to the police.
Awesome thing to put on a business card, by the way.
Yeah.
So
And he's looking over, the murder victims, but he also has a research institute filled with increasingly eccentric and odd other scientists. He kind of fits. He's not a mad scientist. That's the thing. Whenever you see this film parodied, like Mickey Mouse cartoons did parodies of this movie and things like that, because there's a character called Dr. Triple X, but they're actually parodying Dr. Wells, who is a mad scientist.
Yeah.
Dr. X is more kind of a prototype of what we would call in comic books a super scientist, because he doesn't have a specific doctorate that seems like he just seems to be, well, if it's science, I do it. I do a little bit of psychology. I do a little bit of radiology. I also apparently am a medical doctor. I'm basically a doctor of everything.
It's like Doctor Who.
Yeah, exactly. And, I'm down. I love this trope of this sort of polymath genius.
Buckaroo Banzai, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and he has his buddies, and they're going to be researching stuff. And in this instance, he gets involved in a spooky mystery of sorts. And I love the look of Lionel Atwill when they introduce him, because because they're trying to have a mystery of sorts, and they do give him a certain sinister look to him. Like, he has this great coat with like a fur collar and like fur sleeves on it, and it kind of makes him look like a giant owl. And like there's something very, creepy about the way he looks when he's introduced. But he's not actually the villain, which I think is interesting, as this is a horror film of the time. Like, the title character, you think Frankenstein, you think Dracula. The title character is usually the monster or villain of sorts, and in this case, no, it's not. But man, like, I don't know if they like Lionel Atwill, appears in a lot of horror films. He appears in a lot of Universal horror films. We did Son of Frankenstein, which is probably his best known role a couple of years ago. But he's so freaking cool in this movie. Like, I love everything about this. I'm like you, Jason. I would love to have them done like a proper sequel to this, where we get another adventure of him doing, something. Bring him and Fay Ray back. Maybe they're doing something in Paris.
He easily could have been like the Saint or any of those characters who got like a whole series of rather low budget, potboiler films. And it's unfortunate that didn't happen. He's also got, so in his household is his daughter, the lovely Fay Ray, and she dotes on him and tells him when he needs to get sleep and so forth.
She's lovely.
And so,
she's also a badass. Like, she's really smart and clever and funny. She doesn't just she's not just helpless and idiotic. She's like, I'm on to you. I love it when she just stands there watching the journalist guy take the pictures out of the frames. She's just like, really, dude?
yes.
Really? And then she just comes in. She's like, so
so into their lives comes this reporter who is really trying to figure out what the police know about this series of murders. And so the reporter starts a flirtatious thing with Fay Ray, and the reporter's name is Lee, played by a guy named Lee Tracy. And so those are our heroes.
Lee is, and especially the scenes he has with Fay Ray, and maybe it's because I just very recently rewatched Ghostbusters, but it strikes me as very like the sort of like snappy patter between the two of them. Like, he is kind of a proto Bill Murray.
You think about Peter Venkman? Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes. Because he's obnoxious, and he's playing a lot off of his own obnoxiousness and sort of occasional cowardice, but also his bravery and it's a neat, very human character. Silly, I mean, full of a lot of like gags and slapstick and so forth, where he backs into something and then mugs and so forth. But it's great. It's really neat. I'm really curious about the play, because the play was called The Terror, and I assume that these are our main characters of the play as well. And I'm curious like how much just carries over into the film. I know nothing about it. I would love to like look that up and find out what's up with the play that became Dr. X. So the police the police go to see Dr. X at his surgical research institute. And as you mentioned, we introduce all the other super scientists who are all doing crazy super science experiments. And they all yeah.
You owe me a Coke. They all have. There's all a rationale that that every single one of them might be cannibals.
Yes. Because we should mention the person who is killing people, we establish because Dr. X goes to one of the autopsies, or rather just to analyze the body in this morgue. And by the way, the morgue set is great. The morgue set is amazing. I totally believed that I was in a 1930s morgue. I don't know what a 1930s morgue looks like, but I believed that this was one. It totally had me convinced. And Yes,
That's what I'm
somebody
saying.
has.
All the
Yeah,
sets look beautiful. The morgue set, like you said, I don't know what the morgues looked like back then, but the science set at his, I'm getting echo. The science set at his house, I feel like looks, or maybe it was the lab. I might have been the lab. Anyway, I feel like they commissioned an artist and said, make art that looks sciencey, because all of the neat
yeah.
setup. Just these beautiful glass globe chandelier looking things, and it's really neat looking. It's just, and the houses are beautiful. The house that both the two houses that the professor has are just gorgeous. It's really neat.
It really does feel like. Remember we watched And Then There Were None, and there's just that feeling of just, even though that's a fairly cynical play, but you walk into it and you go, I totally get the notion of, I'm going to go into a movie theater and I'm going to be astonished at beauty, and amazing sets and people talking in that crazy accent that Fay Ray uses, that is the weirdest accent, but somehow I'm just transported to this strange alternate world of amazing furniture and people with funny with weird mid-Atlantic accents and everything. It's especially when you can feel so anxiety ridden watching the news all day. It can be neat to be just completely transported like this. Anyway, yes, the killer is eating people. The killer is strangling people, but also eating portions of them. And so the police are like, hey, tell us about the mad scientists besides yourself at your research institute. Which one of them might be able to strangle people and maybe eat them a little? And all of them have had some
Injury.
mysterious connection with cannibalism.
Well, but they've also all had some injury. So yeah,
Yes.
so he goes, well, for sure it's not Wells because he only has one arm. And I'm like, oh, it's for sure Wells.
Right.
As soon as I said that, I was like, yeah, it's definitely Wells. I'm not sure how exactly, if he's just making only having one arm or what, but there's somehow it's going to be Wells.
Yes.
There's a strain of, as much as this was like an attempt to, outdo Frankenstein, which
what was it? What was this film? Was this film?
This was a
direct
that they were trying to out Frankenstein.
I see.
And then, yeah. And, as much as this is that, especially with all the electrical apparatus and cannibalism and synthetic flesh and everything, there's such a heavy streak of like Agatha Christie in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is very much like an old dark house setup where, these people are in this great mansion and, there's a mystery and, the guy's a reporter, but he's also effectively a detective. And so is Dr. X.
That is the hero.
Yeah.
Journalist.
And, all that stuff is just, I don't know. It makes me happy.
You're right. It is way more Agatha Christie than, for instance, any of the Universal ones are. This element of mystery. There's essentially zero mystery in Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein. I'm trying to think of any of them introducing a mystery element, and they really don't. They're thrillers. They're thrillers and morality play. Nothing wrong with that. But this one is like completely, it is a straight up mystery. And by the way, once they introduced, they said, he's a killer, has a ugly, disfigured face. Okay, everybody here has some kind of disfigurement. And also he's a cannibal. Everybody here managed to have been shipwrecked with cannibals at some point. So Dr. X goes, I get it. I got it. I know exactly what to do. All of the people who work for me, I want them all to come to my Bruce Wayne style mansion on the cliffs of Long Island, like on another planet. Like it's, there's jagged cliffs, but also a beach. And there's, this house looks massive. This house looks like the size of Rhode Island. And they're all going to gather there, and I'm going to do some crazy experiments. And thereby I'm going to figure out who the killer is. That is so great. That's so, even up to like House on Haunted Hill, right, is still very much the same thing. I'm going to gather everybody together, and so the plot can happen. Wonderful. I'm grinning from ear to ear at the
and that's another thing that super bugged me, just in terms of realism. Because but for that,
So I'm grinning from ear to ear, but it bugged you. Okay.
No, not what you're talking about, but just something I thought of that I wanted to say that bugged me is that the reason that he goes out to the house is because he convinces the cops to give him 48 hours to be the, to figure out who is doing this. And I'm like, there is no way in the universe that these cops are going, oh yeah, okay, you go ahead and figure out who at your school is doing it. I would be convinced that they were just going to spend this time like destroying evidence or whatever. I mean, it just seemed like so unrealistic
It's
to me,
just
especially after there's another murder at the house, and it's like, come on. But anyway,
I don't even think they mention it. I mean, Dr. X, I don't think he bothers to mention. Oh
No,
yeah, since that moment before I called you,
not only have I not figured out who's the murderer is, but he also murdered somebody.
I lost another one. Yeah,
yeah.
But yeah. So they, Tony, you mentioned that basically Dr. X says, "Hey gang, I'm going to set up a test, and it's a complicated test involving wax dummies and actors and what have you." So tell us about Dr. X's honest to goodness plan.
I mean, it's fairly convoluted. He's gonna reenact the thing. He's gonna get people starting with servants. He's gonna conscript them to reenact the murders, so that, I guess, to see how people react, so they'll know. But that's somehow going to show which person is the true killer. Am I getting that right, Drew? Am I
somehow with science?
No, that's more or less. So I've seen this movie quite a few times, and I'm still trying to. I mean, I love the set, and I love the device, and I love all the wax figures, and I love the whole business of this. I'm still, after seeing this movie dozens of times, not entirely sure what Dr. X is really getting at here.
Okay, so let's think through it. It's like you and me, we both work at the academy. So we're going to be sat in these chairs, right? And we're going to be chained to them so we can't get out. And we're gonna, we're chained to the chairs. Oh, and there's our finger is in a little thing that's measuring electrical impulses. So basically it's an enormous lie detector test.
Yeah.
As we get more stressed, it's going to show up on the red stuff is going to go up inside this machine and show that we're super stressed. And whoever is most
stressed, then that makes sense why that one guy pops up as the guy, because he's getting murdered right then.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a whole part of it that is, here's a bunch of jargon, scientific, quote unquote, scientific jargon, and it goes through here and it goes over here and it goes through this process. And by that process, we distill a way to show how much stress is happening. And that's indicated over here.
Yeah.
It's a lot of jargon.
Yes.
And again, it makes sense that they're trying to out Frankenstein.
For what ultimately,
really fascinating,
again, is a lie
but it
detector
also leads to some great scenes with one super creepy servant being a total creep.
Isn't that guy great though?
Oh, he's awesome at it. But he fits in because all these scientists they're pure scientists. So any of them would do anything for science, basically, and they let that be known. I can't believe you're taking me away from me doing science all the time. But
it's like Jason writing.
They make it really clear that whatever science they're doing is for the good of man.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe that, then you're an idiot. You're below science. And we don't even know what they're actually, what boundaries they're willing to cross. But they make it pretty clear that it sounds like all of them,
Yeah.
It needs corpses, or, if they need to, sometimes you grind up some babies or whatever they need. I'm pretty sure they're going to do it for the eventual betterment of mankind. And if you don't understand how, whatever crazy business that they're up to wouldn't help, then it's, you're not even.
Yeah, that's on you. That's your problem.
Yeah.
And you're right about the servants, because there's an upstairs downstairs thing going on, because you've also got the butler, who is a creep, but he's been called on to play the role of the murderer in the stage play that is supposed to, again, elevate the stress levels of the scientists.
And he takes it upon himself to go, yes, my day has come.
Yeah.
I wanted to murder for so long. I'm not going to say that.
Creep.
He has to fake murder the poor maid, who was just so cute. Yeah. I loved her character a lot. I gotta tell you, I've never been so happy to be wrong in any film. And I was just so sure, Jason and I both, that she was going to be dead. Like, we were like 100% sure. And then I was like, oh, she's not dead. That's awesome.
Yes.
Yay for her not being dead.
I did. I completely expected that the maid was going to be murdered on stage. I really was because I didn't think that there was any law of Hollywood that was keeping that maid alive, and especially because this is something that probably is a little more sophisticated than you would see just a few years later, and maybe that's code related. But the fact that the butler is so is so polite and just a good man around Dr. X, but is just a lech.
He's not so much a lech. He gets off on scaring the maid. Like the guy that's a lech is one of the I forget the character's name, but one of the other scientists who's kind of pervy and has porn.
Oh yeah. He has a French adult magazine. But
they actually cut out a scene. I actually cut out a scene of him offering Fay Ray a book of Japanese erotica.
Really?
Because so there was more stuff with that guy being pervy. But
that's funny.
The butler is a sadist.
Right, exactly. Okay. And that level of it's just really gross that's the way he behaves around what you might call his coworkers, but the boss has no idea. So our good Dr. X, who we've come to admire, and like Reed Richards sort of has a handle on everything, does not at all have a handle on the poor behavior of his chief of staff, or whatever you want to call this guy. And that's really interesting and very real, that basically people get away with stuff, So yes. Anyway, we go through a couple of those tests, and meanwhile, the love affair between Fay Ray and Lee, the reporter, who has come to the mansion, and they let him stay for reasons, whatever, just for convenience and plot reasons. Anyway, they have a nice little love affair happening. They're like hanging on the beach. They got a beach ball, and this is great. I mean, it's so cool that the movie diverts itself for a while to just let them sort of have their hanging out under an umbrella scene. I'm loving all of this. Once again, it's a reminder of you have the evening out. You're showing to the people who have come to the movie theater a good time, and that's going to involve both the chills, but also the little romance and the fantasies of being on a private beach and all of this stuff. Anyway, soon enough, we get back to the scene, and the final one is very, very scary. I mean, we were watching this. People are screaming in the scene as they do the final one where Fay Ray is going to lay on the altar as they reproduce one of the crimes, and everybody's tied down. And as it gets really scary, everybody's screaming. Julia and I were watching this movie in our room, and one of our daughters downstairs literally calls us on the phone, and she goes, "What the hell is going on up there?"
She goes, "I'm sitting here in my room, and I just hear."
Yeah. I look over at Julia, and she's holding the phone like a foot away from her head as Katerina is narrating like what she feels like she's hearing through the ceiling. So yes. And how does it? Oh yes. Well, the reason why everybody's freaking out is because the killer has finally made himself clear, and that happens through a transformation. Now, Julia, explain to us the transformation. The butler is about to go on. We see the butler suddenly get strangled from behind and dragged away, and the killer puts on his cloak. And who is it, and what does he do next?
So, as I said, it's the guy who we'd been told at the beginning of the film he couldn't possibly be the strangler because he only has one hand. So what he's done, and I assumed that he maybe just pretended to only have one hand, but in fact he had two. But no, what he does is he takes off his mechanic, or like his wooden hand or whatever it is, and he puts on a synthetic flesh, as Drew quoted at the beginning, hand, and then proceeds to do this speaking of convoluted science, super convoluted science. And by the way, they have already handcuffed the other people who have said, okay, we're all going to be handcuffed to these chairs so we can do this test, and it's going to be run by this guy. What did we say his name was?
Wells.
Wells, yeah. But it's going to be run by Wells, and so then he's gone for what must be an hour doing his makeup, because he does this whole experiment or not experiment, but its whole process where he like basically it's very much Frankenstein, it's alive. Like he's electrifying the hand so that it can come to life. And then he's putting on layers and layers of I guess whatever latex was back then, just
Synthetic.
plaster. Yeah, synthetic flesh.
Well, it's
Yeah,
synthetic flesh.
all over his face and and he puts on this wig. He's going to do this whole disguise that he's been doing whenever he's been killing people and then putting on the cloak. And then he comes out finally hours later and goes to, because the maid said, no, I'm not doing this again. Hell no, screw you. And good for her. So Fay Ray is voluntold to be the victim. And so she's lying there, and this guy comes out, having killed the poor butler. Well, I say poor butler, he's kind of a jerk. But anyway, the butler, he comes out in his cloak, and she says, oh, and by the way, I just want to back up for a minute and say, I love that they create entire perfectly realistic wax figures of all the victims.
Yes.
But anyway, he comes out, he goes to kill her in front of the scientists who are chained to their chairs. And she says, it's the killer, it's the killer. And they all stand up trying to get out of these handcuffs. It's just horrible and ridiculous. And so he's trying to kill her. Although really scary,
as stupid as it
is. It is very scary.
Totally,
and she's a good screamer. So he's trying to kill her. And then our hero / journalist / comic relief / detective comes running in and charges the guy. But so all that, at that point, I love it because I think that guy's great. But I did think that the scene with him transforming himself is silly because he, like I say, they're sitting there for like an hour waiting for him to come back. And then he does all this and he immediately confesses that who he is and that he's the killer.
But it's it's a pathological thing with him.
Yeah.
Like, I think he makes himself ugly because he feels ugly. Like, I think it's partly a disguise. But I think it's partly, a psychological thing with him. It's his way of like, I'm not a murderer. I'm not a cannibal. I'm becoming this other person. I mean, he even says Wells is dead. This is the new Wells. And
yeah, but that seems like new Wells should be easier to put together in the morning than he is.
I'm not bothered by the transfer because it's basically exactly like the transformation sequence in an anime. Where your character is like, Gatchaman, where they transform into their hero powers. Everything stops for that stuff. I'm fine with it. And
it looks so cool. Like the transformation thing and the whole business of him saying synthetic flesh, yes. Like that is quite possible because like up until this point, what you have is kind of a standard old dark house movie. And, there's not this like full on, even though there's talk about cannibalism and stuff like that, there's not this like full on horror / sci-fi element. And then all of a sudden you have this scene that's just crazy town. That comes out of nowhere. And, it's really gross and effective even this many years later. And I love the sort of like cone-headed look of like his final monster shape. And there's like, interesting bits of trivia about this too, because apparently they're even the way they looped him saying synthetic flesh to where you never actually see him saying the words. That's because they thought that some parts of the country even saying flesh out loud like that might be too much for people, so they wanted it to be in such a way that they could edit it out of the movie if they needed to. Yeah, like this movie was considered. It's funny, it's like I always say, like, time renders everything quaint. This movie was considered kind of strong stuff for the 30s, and we watch it now, it's kind of easy to forget that in some ways. But like I
think, a lot of it's ahead of its time, and it's got a lot of stuff, like somebody reading a, nudie mag, and the way that, again, how the butler comes across, and then like what you're talking about, like there's this body horror thing with, at the time, advanced technology, like this synthetic flesh stuff, it's not quite the Tetsuo the Iron Man of its time, but it's not far off for the 30s.
There is so much. You're right, Tony. There's so much going on.
So yeah, I could totally see how it would blow people's minds and also be just completely horrifying. It is a pretty horrific effect even now. The fact that it's as old as it is pretty impressive.
Well, he also
a lot of other stuff.
He also looks so much like bigger once he's in his like full monster form. Like I don't know if it's just like that the mask makes his head look taller, or maybe if they got like a stuntman to play the monster or what. But like, you know, like just like the full transformative aspect of this. Like I remember the first time I saw it, like I dug the movie already, but like when it got to this point, I was like, this is the stuff right here.
Yeah.
Like this is why I like horror is you know, because it's just this batshit crazy out of left field thing.
Yeah, because you think it's just going to be the cannibalism part, and then you're going to find the killer, which is pretty standard. And even that would be, with everybody screaming and everything, would be enough horror. But instead, you know, this is a guy who's going to regrow limbs and transform himself into a horrific monster.
It's a pretty great technology, by the way. If he's managed to, like, you can use this synthetic flesh stuff to make a limb and then electrify it using whatever science magic that is to make it a working limb. I mean, what a boon to mankind that is, by the way.
Well, yeah, if only he wasn't insane.
Yes, right.
This is yet another example.
Are that far off? You get the impression again. Like they're all just this side of mad scientists, every single one of them.
Yes,
except maybe our host. You know, Dr. X, maybe not.
Dr. X still seems pretty kooky, but it's like benevolent kooky.
Right.
Well, although they make him sinister enough to where I think they're trying to invite suspicion about him, even though, as Julia says, the mystery is not anything that it's not that mysterious. Like there's, especially if you know mystery tropes. Like, I don't think that, although, like, I'm less bugged about that, and I'm more bugged about the one thing about the ending that sticks with me is how did Wells, not only must he have a secret mad science lab in the Institute, but how did he get a secret mad scientist lab set up in the secret tunnels in Dr. X's mansion?
I don't think it's science. Oh, yeah, you're right, because he does have a secret lab.
Just science.
Clearly,
not his house.
In his super science trunk that he had carried to the mansion.
Maybe he just adapted an already existing secret lab.
Yeah,
sure.
Mad science.
That'll go with that.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes about as much sense as anything.
Right.
Yeah. So cool, this synthetic.
My stars and garters, how a boon to mankind. I've found another secret lair. Thank you, previous mad scientists. Yeah. I swear fealty to do all the mad science that you failed to do with my new lab,
which is underneath Dr. X's mansion that he did. Yes. My goodness. I mean,
it's like Phantom of the Opera kind of stuff.
Yes. Well, right. But imagine that, like, 20 years after the Phantom of the Opera, and I guess a good long time before the setting aside the auction that begins that play, but 20 years after the Phantom of the Opera, another guy finds all the Phantom of the Opera's tunnels and go, I shall become a new Phantom. That's certainly, by the way, that's how Marvel Comics works all the time. Somebody goes, time to be a new Hobgoblin.
Well, or
Goblin derivative.
Hey, look, there's this abandoned AIM lab. Let's start that back up. That's going to be...
Yes. I love crazy... I don't even know what you call this. Mad science or whatever.
That would be a fun series of some sort, is the people who have to hunt down decommissioned labs, prevent them from, like,
that's a
you'd
great
be like
idea.
the advanced idea mechanics version of Indiana Jones. So you have to just look, we know they were operating, we know it was shut down. It's not like the villains tell us where things are. It wouldn't even have to take place in Marvel. Just that would be pretty.
That's a great idea.
Something else. Like
we try. You're right that's an Indiana Jones kind of story, because it's a hunt for a lost tomb, but it's not a tomb; it's a lab. But it's the same thing.
Yeah. A lot of, if it's the right mad scientist, it's kind of both.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Like you would be surprised at the amount of crossover between tomb and lab that mad science brings to the table.
Going back with Dr. X and his sinister nature, the way that he comes across is very much in keeping with those other super science dudes, like you mentioned, like Doc, I mentioned Reed Richards and Doc Savage, but any of these kind of characters, and or Reed Richards in Marvel, because Stan Lee kind of, he's dealing with a lot of these same tropes. But always those guys are naturally a little alien because that's just how they seem to the rest of us who are not Reed Richards or Doc Savage.
Well, yeah, because you're not as smart as them.
And that'll never happen. So the best you can hope is that they're at least able to communicate with us because they're operating on a different plane. It's like they're angels who walk on the earth.
The only time that Dr. X seems more humanized is when he's dealing with his daughter.
Yes.
Like the relationship between the two of them is really cool. Like it's got a lot of warmth to it, and
well, he genuinely cares. And if something happened to her, he would band together with any of the other scientists and bring her back to life.
Yes, that's true.
through any scientific means possible.
Even if you had to start stealing spinal fluid all over the city,
whatever it takes.
Keep her alive.
The other scientists will be down with that because they can get some credit.
Yes,
but he is the kind of scientist because he's so warm and so their relationship is great, but if anything happened to her,
isn't that the plot of Eyes Without a Face? In fact, isn't he killing people and taking their faces because his daughter needs a face?
It's a trope that's done, but
I think that's right.
Dr. X has a loving relationship with his daughter that I'm sure would turn into pure mad science if anything ever happened to her.
Yeah.
It's got to.
But it's an amazing character, and that's, by the way, the end. Once Wells reveals himself, he does fight with Tracy, and Tracy manages to throw him out
and light him on fire at the same time. He manages to light him on fire with the lantern because, of course, synthetic flesh goes up like a match. And so he lights him on fire and then pushes him out the window. Thankfully, does not go out the window with him. So I'm just like, that guy is badass.
An exciting
I love
scene.
that character.
I mean, it's a good scene.
It is.
Yeah.
When a corpse flies,
I love the way
the body flies out the window on fire. That's
it's fantastic.
Things have gone.
I love the way he spits into his fist before he's about to charge the monster version of Wells too. It's like he's one of the things that's great about his character. Actually, they go throughout the entire movie. He's kind of superstitious.
Yes,
and like that business of him spitting into things is part of that. So
he throws all the salt over his shoulder when he spills it, and he says, "You're right. That's true."
The whole thing where he has to hang out in the morgue. He's like, that was creepy. I didn't like that at all. Great.
A lot of the times when you watch these old movies and you have a character that's going to end up with the ingenue heroine, you don't really like the guy as much as you like this guy.
Well, he goes back and forth though. His come-ons are definitely of a time, and how he tries.
Well, and he starts off
obnoxious.
Yeah, he starts off creepy. He starts off just being, because the thing is, and this is true now as well. You cannot trust that a journalist is going to be on your side, because as soon as the story becomes, as soon as you have information about the story, you got to be pretty clear that stuff is off the record before they're going to use it. I saw an article recently that said something like, "Journalists, you can trust journalists, but they're not your friends," or something like that. Anyway.
Right.
That's the thing. So up until the point where he actually, kind of gets in a relationship with her, he's trying to get info from her for the story. And so, he's a little sleazy and he lies, he's on the fire escape and he's trying to make up reasons. It gave me a John Lovitz, that's the ticket kind of vibe where he's just coming up with stuff. And then he, what was the other thing that he did that I was just like, while he's trying to steal the pictures and he's trying to, but then once he's full on in love with her, he becomes the hero now. He's just gonna, the buzzer thing. The buzzer thing annoys the crap out of me. I'm like, you just got to stop buzzing people's hands. That's annoying.
But the whole thing is that he has to learn to fight for something other than his paycheck. Because you never really get the sense that he's that passionate about journalism. It's just a steady job during a time that jobs were not easy to come by, I might add. But
that's a good point. That is
what's kind of funny about the hand buzzer thing and the exploding cigar are, into the 80s, those were still things you could buy from the back of a comic book.
Oh my God, thank you for mentioning that, Tony.
Like loads to put in the cigars and cigarettes, as well as hand buzzers, of course, whoopee cushions and X-ray specs. But all of that stuff, hand buzzers especially, something you could still buy, still advertised. 50 years later. Which,
Wow.
by the way, one time I think my stepbrothers may have bought, I forgot who bought them, but we did attempt cigarette loads on my grandmother.
How'd that work?
She smoked at the time. Yeah, she wasn't too happy about that.
Are they basically like tiki-takas? I mean, are they
just
poppers?
pop, like they ruin your
Poppers,
cigarette and pop really loud, like the kind.
So you could do it. In other words,
you
can go get some snap pops and just like empty out the tobacco in a Marlboro and put a little snap pop in there.
Well, these were like they're like just a sliver of, really tiny, and you just put it in the tobacco. But yeah, it sounds like the ones that are kind of wrapped in paper that you throw down.
Yeah,
but
interesting.
Yeah. And it blows up. Like you see what happens in the movie where it's and he's really angry, it's really great considering the exchange between him and the police officer.
Yeah.
And that, that kind of thing sets the pace. That's a pretty common trope. The journalist and the policeman, I mean,
who are joshing one another.
Goes through to Kolchak, which we just covered.
Yeah, that's true. They regard him as an annoyance, but also as just a guy that they have it's basically a noir trope, kind of before the noir thing.
The early parts of this are very detective movie because he's wandering around a waterfront in a trench coat and a hat, and this movie crisscrosses a lot of different genres, and that's one of the things I think I like a lot of the times about horror films of this time period is that what we have solidified as a horror film hasn't fully formed yet. So they're still like testing stuff out, and you get to see horror's roots in science fiction and mystery a lot more, I think, in movies of this time period, whether, later on, I think particularly from the 70s on, like a horror film is, you have a more solidified idea of what a horror film should be in most people's eyes.
With a few, the serial killer genre stays in the kind of in the mystery world. That like sliver of the horror tree. Like we've talked about how Friday the 13th is very much an Agatha Christie like story. And really even the ripoffs are generally, you think of something like, I don't know, House and whatever like that. There's still usually a mystery.
The Scream movies
are
all functionally whodunits as well as slasher movies.
Yeah. It's you just have to sort of. You're right, though, with stuff like Halloween, obviously it's not. So it's this branch that then splits into slasher whodunit and slasher not whodunit. I like the whodunit style. I really do.
Well, and the funny thing is about this is that you get a movie that, starts out kind of a detective movie and then turns into an old dark house movie. And then for like the last 10 minutes, it's like a full-on monster movie. And you get that all within the course of less than 2 hours.
Yeah.
And, so maybe there is something to say like about this sort of everything and the kitchen sink approach. Because I really enjoy this movie. It's you keep mentioning about how it's different from the Universal monster films. And it is true. But it's in that difference that I find this movie very fascinating, because it's almost like when Dracula and Frankenstein came out, and then you had the first MGM made their version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which was kind of the first reaction from another studio. It's almost like you had Monster Wars kick off, who can make the best scary movie between all these different studios, and who can beat Universal at their own game. And as it turns out, no one was really able to beat Universal at their own game, but there were some very, very interesting films made in response to that I think a lot of the times in the modern conversation about this time period, which is why I picked this movie and next week's movie, which is also not a Universal movie.
What's next week? I can't remember.
Next next week is Mad Love, which is a Peter Lorre movie.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I think these movies get ignored a lot because the Universal movies are so great, and they do have
I thought Mad Love was a silent film.
Mad Love is not a silent film.
That's wild. Okay, can't wait to see it. I've probably seen it before and just completely forgot.
It is based off of a silent movie called The Hands of Orlac, but Mad Love is a talkie.
Huh. I can't explain this at all. Yeah, so okay, I'm down with it though. Obviously, I will be here regardless. And that's from 3 years after this. So cool. All right, let's get our final thoughts on Dr. X. I feel like the time has just flown by. It's sort of amazing. So we went Drew, Julia, Tony, Jason. Drew, final thoughts, Dr. X.
Well, I feel like it could almost dovetail off of what I was just saying.
Yeah.
I really think that this is an important piece of horror cinema that is not talked about enough in contemporary days. I didn't even get to talk about like the differences, like how most people have, growing up saw the black and white version. And then now it's actually kind of hard to find the black and white version. The color version is what you'll come across most places on Blu-ray or streaming. But the fact that there are two versions, that the color version was lost for several decades. But great movie, great performances. Fay Wray is beautiful in this. Everything about this movie is just something to be treasured. And, so much about modern horror comes from this one movie. So, if you've never seen it, it's on Prime as a rental. You can, rent it tonight. It's a perfect time of year to watch a movie like this. Please consider watching Dr. X because it is one of my favorites from this time period.
I hope people do, because again, I want AO3 to be full of Dr. X fanfic. That is just my dream for this. Julia, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I've said most of it. It's just really neat. There's some neat direction, like there's some neat camera angles, some interesting choices. Like I said about the quote unquote the wax figures, which are just actors posing, but still the wax figures of all the murder victims. I'm wondering, I guess he's just super rich. I also think I told you I got annoyed by the cops kind of letting him do whatever he wants as far as the Dr. X having 48 hours and then more time to figure stuff out on his own. I can't help but think that he's so rich that maybe he's a huge donor of the police commissioner. So they're just like, we let him do what he can, what he wants to, because he's obviously rich enough to have these gorgeous 2 estates, and he's obviously rich enough to be able to commission wax figures of victims for his, experiment, and plus all this lab work and all this. I don't know. So he's very, very rich. I love the sets. I loved Fay Wray's character and the journalist character. The maid, I like her a lot. The scientists, they're all kind of, even though they have some different things, like each of them has a different disability and a different thing, they kind of all run together for me, except for Wells and Dr. X, but that's okay. I think it's just really unusual, and I just can't believe, because I think about what we talk about this with Ed Wood and with other movies, what we could do. It's like, especially I love when Tony always says, well, I couldn't do better whenever we're criticizing a film. This film shows what you can do with very little, because it's not, I don't mean they had money for sets and things, but they didn't have the technology that we have now, and any of it. So the fact that they could do this much with what they had is just remarkable to me. I'm always like, this really shows you how much human ingenuity, how far it can go even before it's reached the ability to create new technologies, just how much you can do with what you have, the resourcefulness. So I think it's really neat. And I didn't used to watch very old films before we started doing this podcast, and now it makes me want to watch more other kinds of films, like not horror of this time period, to see, because other than like the Wizard of Oz, I really haven't watched a whole lot of stuff from the 30s and 40s. So yeah, I think it was a pretty neat experience.
Wonderful. Thank you. And that also, I agree. It would be cool to like dig deep into some more 1930s material. There's something, because I watched a fair amount of without paying much attention to it. Fair amount of 30s and 40s material when I was a kid because my mom just liked old movies. And so the sort of background hum of a 30s or 40s movie, the sound of dialogue on these old recordings, the sort of, I can't even describe it other than that if you're in another room and you hear somebody talking in a movie from the 30s or the 40s, you know it instantly because of the way the dialogue sounds. And to me, it's like it's like a shot in the arm. It's wonderful. So I agree. Yeah, let's do it. Tony, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really dig the movie. I need to try to dig up the black and white one because I want to see that as well. I was kind of surprised at the Technicolor, how that presentation worked. It was really cool. They're really trying a lot of things, and it's really neat to see, a 90-year-old movie that has, body horror, science madness, in addition to some of the comedy bits, the detective part, all of the moral ambiguity about, what do we do with science, a cannibalism theme, like all these things are in this one movie. It's pretty impressive. I liked it a lot. I found myself, thinking a lot about and just marveling at how much they were playing with in this one film, and they do it pretty well. It's of this time period, which some people may see as more quaint, or I know a lot of people, for better or worse, who just there's a certain film age, where they're just not going to watch it. But right. I hope it's always my hope that bringing more movies to light, people go, maybe I should check that out, and then sounds like it worked with Julia as well. I always just like, hey, you've seen this, what else is out there? And that curiosity about film is always just really cool to me. I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to the rest of the series that we do.
Cool. Wow, I could not add anything to that other than that I am really looking forward to continuing this 1930 set with Mad Love next week, which is maybe the thing that first made Peter Lorre a star, and then after that we're going to be doing The Mummy, which is Universal horror, and I don't even know if I've ever actually seen The Mummy. If I have, it's been 20 years, and we're going to be joined by guests, our friends from the Monster Movie Happy Hour, who will be celebrating their first year anniversary of work together. So that'll be super fun. I'm excited. This has been so much fun. Let's do some endorsements. I'd love to hear what you guys have been reading or listening to. With Julia, I know exactly what we've been reading and listening to. We went Drew, Julia, Tony. So Drew, what do you have to endorse this week?
Well, first off, on my birthday, I went to the drive-in, and unlike most of the other times that I've been to the drive-in recently, in which I saw an older movie that had already been out, like I've seen Rocky Horror and Jaws and Ghostbusters, I actually had the novelty of seeing a new movie on Monday, a New Zealand horror comedy called The Dead, or just simply Dead, depending on how you're seeing it, which is about it's about a guy who has invented a drug that allows him to see ghosts. And then subsequently there is a murdered police officer who is trying to solve his own murder because he's killed by a serial killer who is killing gay men around this New Zealand town. And so this mixed matched pair teams up to solve who the murderer is. Not perfect, but pretty damn funny, and definitely carrying on a strong tradition of horror comedy from New Zealand. So I enjoyed that quite a bit. I think it's going to be streaming here in another few weeks, but if you do have a drive-in nearby and they are showing it, I would say it's worth it, if nothing else for the novelty of seeing a new film on the big screen for the first time this year, since way back when I saw The Invisible Man, which now seems like 8 years ago. I also caught speaking of horror films with a LGBTQ element to it. I also saw Spiral on Shudder, which is very much in the tradition of like a slow burn sort of Rosemary's Baby or Wicker Man or that kind of thing. It's about a gay couple that moves to this suburban town with their teenage daughter, and weirdness starts happening around them. It's funny, the two movies that I'm recommending are even though they both have, gay main characters, like they're and that kind of element to it, they couldn't be more different in terms of tone, because Spiral is a deadly serious movie, and if you're looking for a movie that's actually going to try and like make your skin crawl a little bit, look no further, because there's some legitimately disturbing imagery in it. A lot of people are comparing it to Get Out, and I do see why. But honestly, I think if we're going to compare it to like a modern horror film, I would actually say it actually has more in common with Midsummer. But it's definitely, like I said, if you like kind of depressing, very slowly paced, that sort of, cerebral type horror, it's definitely in that vein, and you'll get something out of it. So those are my two recommendations, and they're two as opposed to the film we just reviewed, they're two very contemporary works of horror fiction.
Oh yeah. So what have you been?
Well, like you said, what we've been working taking in, I guess I'll say, this week is, because we were part of a book club, we've been taking in the 1,000 pages / 50 hours of audiobook Centennial by James Michener. And that's been taking up a lot of our time. I think I would endorse it if you are the kind of person who really enjoys a very like historical fiction, and this is historical fiction spanning from the creation of the mountains from molten lava all the way through the 70s. So I mean, it's quite a thorough examination of the history of Colorado, so it's there's some really interesting pieces about like the relationship between the Indian tribes with each other and with the white men that come in and take over, and then of course all the various types of people that come through Colorado and set up here. So that's that's interesting. I don't know that it's for everyone, but it's certainly well done and well written. I'm trying to remember, there was something else that I had thought of earlier in the week that I watched. Oh, well, Jason and I just watched what is it? You Should Have Left. You Should Have Left. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Yeah, with Kevin Bacon. That is a scary ass film. Oh my gosh. That is so scary. We watched that. We probably need to cover it at some point for the podcast. But anyway, if you're looking for something scary to watch during the October month, Halloween month, check that out on, I think it's Netflix and probably a bunch of other things. But that is truly, truly frightening and kind of what I call a mindfuck movie.
I think it was on video on demand.
Maybe.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But whatever. It's a new-ish.
Yeah.
It just came out a couple months ago, at least.
Kevin Bacon
and Amanda. How do you say her last name? Seyfried.
Seyfried. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
So good. Excellent. Thank you. Tony, what do you have for us?
So continue with recommendations from like last week's Fantastic Fest celebration. A couple movies, if we can find them, I'd like to cover them. But I recommend seeking them out. They're at festivals now, so it's a little hard to find. But these are the ones that you put on your list, basically. One of them is Queen of Black Magic, and wow, it is based on loosely, very, 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 very loosely based on previous movie, and it has all kinds of child endangerment. It is something else. But yeah, Queen of Black Magic. Again, it's super creepy. Has a lot of just crazy stuff going on. And when it starts out a little slow, but when it gets going, it's truly pretty amazing. And also, because I'm a sucker for music and horror, another film Bloodthirsty, which this woman goes to write her sophomore album with a producer, and sinister things begin to happen. He's not exactly what he seems. It's her and her girlfriend, which is, their dynamic is really interesting. And I've recommended for Drew because he's a big, monster fan, werewolf fan. So, and also the music, it was co-written by a Canadian artist, Lowell, and her mother. And she does the music. Lowell does the music for the movie. And there's, I tend to watch a lot of, metal and horror, but there's a lot of really good pop music that, kind of songwriter. In the vein of, Poe, I would say, there's a lot of artists in that same kind of, genre, but it was really catchy tunes. They're they're done really, really well. And it was kind of cool to have an artist, working with her, her mother to write this. And I was really, the whole cast was great. It was a really interesting movie. Went places I didn't really see. And it was really well done. So, also be on the lookout for Bloodthirsty because it was really, really cool. Oh, also Arrow Video, tons of cult classic movies. Definitely Underground has their own Roku channel now.
Oh, wonderful.
So that was pretty, that's pretty cool. I think it is subscription, but they do have, if I noticed correctly, they have a trial period. So that was really, that's pretty neat. Arrow does a lot of underground film stuff, so that's pretty cool. They just recently launched that. Those are my recommendations. Oh, also, I just noticed a previous Fantastic Fest movie, Tumbad, is on Amazon Prime, and it is super creepy, and I think we should cover it. I recommend.
How do you spell that, Tony?
It's Tumbad, and it's really cool. But I was looking around because I was like, I'm looking for more kind of creepy, cool movies, kind of off the beaten path stuff that people may or may not have seen. And it was a Fantastic Fest movie. Looks amazing. Super creepy things go on. Really cool effects. But I noticed it was on Prime, so you can watch Tumbad. You can add it to your spooky season list. There's also another movie that I thought there's a darkly comic movie I saw during the Fantastic Fest, and I really hope it gets distribution for the holidays.
What's that?
It's called How to Deter a Robber, and it had a really good cast. They worked really well together. The Q&A was really charming because everybody really enjoyed the shoot, and it was really, really cool. But definitely be on the lookout for How to Deter a Robber.
Wonderful.
It's the perfect kind of, if you like dark comedy, slightly thriller, they had to deal with robbers. That's, that sets the name says it all. But it's really great, and I really hope that it's a really perfect dark Christmas time movie. There's been several. I would put it in with rare exports and that kind of stuff. Totally different, doesn't have any of the supernatural, but I just really hope somebody gets it in front of people in the Thanksgiving, Christmas area of releasing movies, because I think it would do well if you like this podcast and darkly humorous off-brand Christmas movies do it for you. How to Deter a Robber was really, really good.
The only thing that I will mention, because really my entire week has been taken up trying to absorb Centennial, which Julie and I are just loving. And by the way, if you throw yourself into like a 1,000-page book that covers hundreds of years and lots of characters, you become obsessed with it. So you're just constantly just thinking about it and everything. So that was really fun. But the other thing is, we are preparing for the Castle of Horror podcast book, which comes out around Christmas time. And so one big piece of it is these transcripts of a whole bunch of our favorite episodes of the show. So that's what I've been working on for the last several days. And it is slow going, by the way, to take a transcript and massage it into something that you can read and it makes sense. Because the way people talk, you want it to be readable and sound conversational, but it's work to get it there. And but it's been super fun. So this is my distant early warning endorsement. The Castle of Horror podcast book is going to be so fun because we're going to cover, favorite episodes from all of us, such as, Daimajin, which is a favorite of Tony's, and Jason Lives, which is a favorite of Drew's, and for reasons unexplained, Embrace of the Vampire, which is a favorite
No,
of
it's
of
explained.
Julia's.
It's because that is my favorite podcast episode because it's hilarious. I literally, if I'm just walking around and I start thinking about it, I start laughing out loud again. It's just so funny.
So I'm having a great time. So that I hate to do log rolling, but what the heck, that book is going to be cool. So definitely you can pre-order now for the Kindle, but we're going to have a paperback version, and I think it's going to be awesome. Anyway, working on that. That's fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you very much, and I can't wait to be back next week. And I will talk to you guys online, because no doubt those of you listening may have your own thoughts about this film or recommendations or what have you. Thank you so much. Everybody be excellent to one another, and I will talk to you next week. Ciao.
Night.
Night.
Night.